is the Victoria-class submarine program one of Canada's worst procurements? Considering one of the 4 second-hand subs purchased experienced a fatal fire just a few days into its delivery voyage, it certainly ranks pretty high for many who are familiar with the project. Plagued by chronic low availability while also being expensive to maintain, the submarine purchase seems to be a good reminder that a low sticker price isn't everything. But let's take a look at the submarines and their issues for today's video. First, let's rewind to the early 1980s. It was at this time that Canada was drafting up plans to replace its 3 aging British Oberon-class submarines delivered in the mid-1960s. Canada found a deal in the form of 4 Upholder/Victoria-class submarines, also known as the Type 2400, due to their displacement of 2,400 tons. According to Canadian Defence Review, the cost of the deal was $750 million Canadian dollars. These diesel-electric submarines, built in the United Kingdom in the 1980s, had been decommissioned in 1994. Naval Encyclopedia notes that they were designed as a cheap alternative to supplement the nuclear submarines of the Royal Navy. It said that the reason Canada was able to acquire the Upholder-class subs was due to an unsuccessful bid to transfer the submarines to the Pakistan Navy in 1993-1994. And so, due to that failed attempt, the Canadian government was able to purchase the 4 submarines and a suite of trainers from the Royal Navy. In Canadian service, the submarines would be labelled the Victoria class, which have the following names: HMCS Victoria, HMCS Windsor, HMCS Corner Brook, and HMCS Chicoutimi. Per a government webpage, it said that prior to entering service, the subs needed an extensive Canadianization package for fire control, national communications, and the already in-service Mark 48 heavyweight torpedoes. The Canadian Encyclopedia adds that Canadianization also involved using the Canadian towed array sonar and periscope equipment fits. Quickly, here are the basic specifications for the submarines per info gathered from the website Army Recognition, as well as an official Canadian government page. Each submarine has a surfaced displacement of 2,220 tons and a submerged displacement of 2,450 tons. They measure 70.3 meters in length with a beam of 7.6 meters and a draft of 5.5 meters. As mentioned earlier, propulsion is diesel-electric, and this consists of 2 Paxman Valenta 16 RPA diesel generators rated at 3,035 kilowatts. There are also 2 GEC 5,000 kilowatt motor generators. The submarine's upper speed is 12 knots on the surface and over 20 knots submerged. Each Victoria-class boat is said to have a range of 10,000 nautical miles or 18,500 kilometers if moving at a constant 12 knots at a test depth of 200 meters. Endurance is listed as being approximately 8 weeks. For armament, the submarines have 6 forward-mounted 533mm tubes capable of launching anti-ship and anti-submarine ordnance. Finally, per an official government webpage, each boat sees a typical crew of 48, along with 5 trainees. With the subs coming from the Royal Navy, work would take place in the UK prior to delivery, and this is where the first issues would appear. Indeed, the Canadian Encyclopedia states that reactivation work in both Britain and Canada turned out to be much more of a challenge than anticipated, particularly as the vessels had not even fully completed their introduction into UK's Royal Navy service before being declared surplus. Furthermore, the complexity of submarine structural technologies was said to be fairly new to Canadian industry. But work would progress slowly, and HMCS Victoria would be the first to be commissioned in 2000. Perhaps the biggest black mark for this submarine class is the tragic and fatal fire on board HMCS Chicoutimi, which took place just days after being accepted. Indeed, the submarine was officially accepted into the Canadian Navy on October 2, 2004, but during its voyage to its new home in Canada, seawater would enter through its conning tower, causing an explosion and fire on October 5th. The incident killed 1 officer and injured 9 sailors and left the submarine dead in the water. An in-depth report by CBC News was quoted as saying, "An air vent in Chicoutimi's tower wasn't working because a nut had fallen off, just 24 hours into the vessel's first trip to Canada. Crew members had to leave 2 hatches open to fix the problem and were working on it when a wave broke over the vessel, flooding the compartments below. The report then says a series of electrical connectors in the captain's cabin that were soaked in the flooding had only 1 layer of waterproof sealant instead of the 3 layers that British Navy specifications required. The sealant was added to the other 3 British subs as they were being built, but not to HMCS Chicoutimi. The badly damaged submarine would not be commissioned into RCN service until 2015. CBC reported in 1999 that prior to delivery, Canadian inspectors found dangerous cracks in the high-pressure air pipe systems. Cracks were also found in the exhaust valves that prevent water from entering the diesel engines. But despite the extreme tragedy of HMCS Chicoutimi and apparent poor condition of the boats, the RCN would persist in its efforts to make the new class of submarines fully operational, and HMCS Victoria would be the first submarine of its class to reach high readiness, successfully firing a Warshot Mark 48 torpedo in 2012, and after that spending most of 2013 at sea. Efforts to get the boats operational are one thing. However, keeping them active and fit for service has been a whole other challenge. According to the site 1945, for years the Royal Canadian Navy has struggled to keep even just 1 out of the 4 subs at sea at any given time. Indeed, the country's own procurement documents acknowledge the Victoria-class fleet is quite increasingly obsolete and expensive to maintain. And so clearly replacements can't come soon enough, but this is still years away. In June 2017, Canada announced that it would modernize and operate the Victoria-class submarines into the mid-2030s, and modernization efforts have been ongoing ever since. This has included projects like flank array modernization, galley improvement, acoustic quieting, and periscope modernization. Most recently, in July 2026, Canada awarded Babcock a contract to sustain the Royal Canadian Navy's submarine fleet. The deal, valued at $1.1 billion, presumably Canadian dollars, makes Babcock the prime contractor for the 6-year program to extend the lives of the vessels. This is presumably the last modernization project before the subs are replaced with modern German boats. So, was the Victoria-class acquisition a major procurement fail? Considering some of the major issues revealed, it would indeed seem so, especially since some issues should have been red flags during pre-purchase inspections. Furthermore, what happened with HMCS Chicoutimi prior to its tragic accident seems to be an issue of a lack of due diligence and poor quality control. At the same time, some argue that logistics explains many other problems with the subs while in Canadian service. Professor Paul T. Mitchell, who was part of the Department of Defense Studies at the Canadian Forces College, wrote in 2013 that most problems experienced with the submarines were a product of processes external to the vessels themselves, rather than attributable to their inherent design. Mitchell says that lengthy refit and few days at sea were partly explained by the orphan status of the subs, as only 4 were ever built. It's explained that when the UK's Royal Navy divested itself of the boats, the companies providing spare parts ceased making them. Making things worse was the fact that spares held by the Royal Navy were not fully acquired by the Canadians due to strict limits placed on the cost of the program. Mitchell then says that re-establishing those supplier networks proved to be both expensive and challenging, and so the availability of parts had limited the ability of the vessels to deploy regularly. It's highlighted that in terms of inherent design, there were some very positive qualities of the Victoria/Upholder class. Indeed, one detailed write-up by an individual by the name of Jerry Prock states, "When operating on battery power, upholders were almost undetectable on passive sonar, and when snorting, their acoustic signature was comparable to their SSN contemporaries in normal operation." Another benefit of the subs that some highlight is that they help to keep the Royal Canadian Navy's submarine experience alive, something that can be difficult to develop/redevelop once lost. Sure, this could have been achieved by purchasing a more off-the-shelf product, but hey, we're trying to look for some difficult-to-find silver linings here. But again, those early reports discussing the poor state of those submarines prior to handover to the Royal Canadian Navy are concerning. Poor logistical management seems to have only made things worse. But hopefully some of these lessons have been taken into account when choosing Canada's next submarines. Hopefully one big lesson being, you get what you pay for. It's only in recent years that defence spending has really become an urgent and priority issue for the Canadian government. Indeed, it was only in July 2024 that the Canadian Patrol Submarine Project, or CPSP, was officially launched by the Government of Canada to acquire up to 12 new conventionally powered under-ice-capable submarines for the Royal Canadian Navy. Selecting the advanced clean-sheet design that is the 212CD from Germany's TKMS, we'll have to wait and see if this massive purchase can avoid the issues that appeared with the Victoria class. On one hand, it's not exactly a proven product that has accumulated years of real-world service. However, with Germany and Norway also joining this program, there's at least more support out there compared to the Victoria class. We'll definitely be covering developments with that massive acquisition, and so we hope you'll consider subscribing to Dominion Defence Review if you're interested in Canadian military equipment and procurement. See you next time.